Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. I think it's quite true to say that in the Bond video game series, when it comes to marketability, the name GoldenEye is more important than almost any other element of that game. And that's of course down to the reputation of the N64 GoldenEye, which pretty much everyone has fond memories of playing with friends and the like, and the game was incredibly influential and is still highly revered. This has unfortunately led to a couple of blatant cash-in opportunities with GoldenEye Rogue Agent and GoldenEye Reloaded, but does a cash-in by its very nature have to be, well, bad? Especially when it's being developed by the very same company that did Nightfire? Not necessarily. I mean, GoldenEye Rogue Agent is, definitely, but as far as Reloaded goes, it seemed to genuinely want to pay homage to the original, or at least that's all the pre-release material would have you believe. Now, GoldenEye 007 was released on the Wii in 2010 as an exclusive, and on the same day, Bloodstone was released as an exclusive for the Xbox and PlayStation, but a year later, a further tweaked, graphically superior version of GoldenEye 007 was released for those latter two platforms with the subtitle Reloaded. It's this version that is going to be the basis of my review today. Largely because the two versions are more or less the same, I mean not including the graphic updates, but the Reloaded version is certainly more, well, loaded, so that's why I'm looking at that particular one. I played it on the PS3, that's the version I'm going to be looking at. So with all that in mind, let's dive right in, shall we, to the very first level of GoldenEye Reloaded.
Begin secure transmission. Good morning, 007.
The game begins with a cutscene in which M, again voiced by Judi Dench, explains to Bond that his mission is to infiltrate General Orumov's factory, where it is believed he is stashing Russian military equipment and selling it onto the black market. Bond's mission, along with that of his colleague 006, is to destroy the stash. Now the level proper begins with a direct homage to the N64 GoldenEye, and this first bit of the level is incredibly similar to that older game, but apart from the odd moment or relatively similar beat here and there throughout the rest of the game, this is totally not a level-by-level remake. Which can be good or bad, depending on your point of view. It is no secret that most gamers would want the N64 original on some kind of virtual console that they could play it on their modern consoles, but it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people bought this game thinking that it was a straight-up remake of the N64 version, and then when you obviously get into it and the level design is completely different, I mean, it is a different gaming experience, and I'm curious to know if that disappointed a lot of people. But whatever, it's good to see Pierce Brosnan back as Bond, isn't it? Much like how Sean Connery returned for From Russia With Love, it's great that the series is so open and willing to pay homage to its own heritage and keep the... You know how, like, when Casino Royale came out and everyone loved Daniel Craig so much, and there was all... I felt like I was seeing a lot of jokes on internet forums and the like about how, people joking that the producers were going to go back to the original Bond films and CG Daniel Craig's face over everyone because he was so popular and loved. I mean, that joke became something of a half-reality, at least. Obviously, Craig was the incumbent Bond at the time, and if they really want this to be an update of the previous GoldenEye, then it makes sense to keep him on as Bond in the game, but it still does feel slightly odd. At least they changed the rest of the cast too, because if this was Daniel Craig interacting with Sean Bean and crew, it would be super weird. The game gets right off to an actiony start, displaying a takedown system and a bit of stealth and snipering before an exciting, speedy shootabout. We get a few nice moments of bonding between 007 and 006, played here by British actor Elliot Cowan, before the pair split up as Bond wants to get evidence of an EMP-hardened helicopter, despite calls not to do so from Trevelyan. So obviously we're back in first-person perspective here, which I've made no secret about being a massive fan of, so I was very happy to be back in this mode. I will say, though, that I felt Quantum of Solace merged the first and third-person perspectives really well by zooming out when Bond performed a takedown or utilised a certain action. There's not really any of that here, so the Daniel Craig model is barely used at all, really. It's a shame because there's neither M nor Bill Tanner appear in person and everyone else is completely new. It means that, well, to a glance at a random screen grab here and there, it's kind of hard to tell that this is even a James Bond game, really. After successfully snapping the helicopter and shooting around the dam, Bond eventually meets up with Trevelyan again as the pair dive off the top of the dam and into the main title sequence.
See reflections on the water, more than darkness in the depths. surface, and never a shadow. On the winds, I feel his breath. GoldenEye found his weakness.
So yeah, we have a new rendition of the GoldenEye movie theme song here, but instead it's produced by non-GoldenEye music composer David Arnold and sung by former Pussycat Doll Nicole Scherzinger. I don't actually hate this version, and I'm actually quite impressed that they managed to get someone as high profile as Nicole Scherzinger to sing it, even if there are one or two moments of screeching that become a bit too much. Heck, it's cool that they even got David Arnold involved in the score of the game too, even if it does adhere to the rule pre-Skyfall that we must never ever use the James Bond theme hardly at all ever anymore.
Nice trick, doing it without a parachute. Trying to show me up? You said we were running late. Let's move. Hey, James. For England?
For England, Alec. Always for England.
After the credits is on to the next level inside the facility, which recreates another few key moments from the N64 game, including shooting this poor chap while he's having a Spectre number 2 and terrorizing some scientists. It's quite a lengthy level, but to be honest, I'm surprised they didn't take more of an opportunity to recreate moments from the N64 game, especially as the facility level of that game is so iconic and Activision already used the exact same layout for a multiplayer level in Quantum of Solace. But still, the level is plenty of fun and well designed, with some really nice touches. I'm especially a fan of the vending machines in this level. Ah, yes, I don't know about you, but whenever I'm feeling peckish at work, I love to take a break over a yeah, or a black, or a bar, or if I really feel like treating myself, a Thai sausage. Anyway, recreating the scene from the film, the level ends with Orumov shooting Trevelyan and Bond making his escape into the next level, which is pretty much non-stop shooting and action as Tanner, voiced again by Rory Kinnear, guides Bond to the extraction point. This includes a bit of a chase on a motorbike, but unfortunately this is nothing more than about a minute of an on-rails shooting section and not a true driving segment. I'll talk about this more later on, about my general disappointment at the lack of vehicle levels in the game, but it's even more disappointing when they tease you like this. But regardless, this is a really fun bit of the game, and up to this point it has followed the structure of the original game and film quite well. The first 3 levels contain the same objectives as the game, and adheres to the key plot moments from the film. Until we get to the next level, it is, which takes Bond right to Barcelona. And immediately after the dam explodes as well. There's no 9-year time jump here. Yes, just as with the 1995 film, Bond must seek out Valentin Zukovsky, who here is a beret-wearing, facially scarred, rough-looking guy and a far cry away from Robbie Coltrane's version of the character. It even seems like this version is somewhat successful, given that his nightclub is packed. I guess these changes are fine for the game, but it's tough to move away from Coltrane's funnier take on the character, but whatever, because this Zukovsky is conclusively killed quite early on, seemingly by one of his bar staff who Bond met earlier, who turns out to be none other than Xenia Onatop, but I'll get more onto her later on. This is a fun level and possibly my favourite of the game. I love how you spend time facially scanning people in the club to find your contact, and how the controls go all weird when you're on the bangin' dance floor, and once the action kicks off, it's a pure shoot 'em up through the various parts of the club, including the bathroom, which is bigger than any flat I've ever lived in, and this more mellow, chill-out room. I really love the music in this level too. It features 2 songs, I Remember by deadmau5 and The Man I Love Echo remix. It's just kind of novel to be zipping around and shooting to music other than the, quite frankly, repetitive and bland score that features for much of the rest of the game. Anyway, the level ends with Bond hopping on a motorbike, teasing the possibility of either an on-rails or driving level, but once again nothing comes to fruition, and instead it's off to Dubai following upon Zukovsky's tip-off about an EMP-hardened helicopter at an arms fair being stolen by Orumov and Xenia, or Xenia, as M likes to put it.
We've identified the woman who murdered Zukovsky as Xenia Onatop.
As the level begins, Bond meets quite possibly the nicest, most polite security guard in the world.
Please, sir. Stop there. Arms out, please. Thank you, sir. Yes, he's right here. Yes, sir. Mr. Briggs is waiting for you at the top of the stairs, sir. Have a good evening.
He's just so sweet, and his adorable little smiles as he talks to Bond. I mean, how does this guy have more personality than most of the main characters in this game? It's here that Bond meets with a man named Sky Briggs, who bears the likeness of game producer David G. Wilson, who happens to be the son of Michael G. Wilson. And there's an odd little touch here during a scene where Briggs is boasting about the fair and says,
By the way, see anything you like, I can probably swing a professional discount.
It's at that moment that for some reason the controller vibrates in your hand. I guess it's to show that Bond is excited about the prospect of discount weaponry. Much like, I guess, how you go on holiday for your duty-free, for your discount cigarettes and alcohol. Bond is gonna be taking plastic bags full of bazookas and AK-47s back on his flight, apparently. Anyway, Briggs is quickly offed by Orumov and Onatop, and it's straight into the action, chasing the villains around the building and shooting up assailants along the way. The level quickly shifts gear into more stealth-focused fare, though, as it seems to try to recreate the frigate level from the N64 GoldenEye, with Bond releasing hostages and such on board a warship. There are some nice features to the level, like the missiles you can shoot off their conveyor belts and use to blow up bad guys, and the room-breaching feature is cool, if going on a little long in some places, especially when there's just like one guy in the room to shoot. My favourite part of this level is the ending, though. Orumov and Onatop succeed in stealing the helicopter and immediately proceed to blow up the frigate, and the level then becomes racing through the fiery, deteriorating warship, dodging firepower from the helicopter, as well as the occasional goon. So much fun. The game then shifts over to familiar ground, as the next mission involves following the stolen helicopter to Severnaya in Siberia. I love in the mission briefing, Tanner talks about how there are Russian troops deployed in the area. They're answering a distress call and you're to avoid them at all costs, which basically amounts to killing them. It's just the idea that Bond is taking out relatively innocent Russian troops who aren't part of the villainous scheme but just doing their job is an interesting choice. Or maybe they are part of the villainy in some way, as Tanner sounds quite untrusting and unconvinced.
1 hour ago, Arumov's helicopter landed at a remote base in Siberia. The Russians claim it's a climate change observation facility with no military purpose.
I wish all of Bond's missions were delivered to him in such a condescending tone as this.
Bond to MI6. Do you read me?
One of the best narrative changes from the film that the game makes is to put Bond in Severnaya as the satellite is used to wipe out all electrical equipment from miles around, and as such brings down Russian MiGs and a helicopter. The attack changes the landscape somewhat, but certain soldiers refuse to change their tactics.
Form a perimeter. We have work to do. Stay focused, man. Federation has spent good money training you for such an event.
Yes, there is fire everywhere and your comrades are either dead or maimed in some way, but we have our orders and I'll be damned if I use my own initiative to adapt them in any way. It's another fun level with its own flavour, especially when you get involved in an exchange of firepower between the Russian soldiers and Orumov's men. Some good snipering opportunities too upon these cliffs. Despite the lack of driving levels and on-rail segments, there is plenty of variety in all the shooting action, and each level so far has had something of a unique element to it. The next level sees you venture inside the Severnaya facility, and it begins with one of the closest things we get to a proper cutscene in this game.
Have you heard from the men in the server room?
Yes, they're working on it.
It's a super quick moment, but I could have done with a whole lot more of it to get a sense of character from these guys. I mean, if you want to sell me on the idea that playing this game is like experiencing a James Bond cinematic adventure, then I need those moments, because a James Bond film is a whole film full of good, interesting, colourful, eccentric characters, and this game seems like it's more concerned with putting you in the head of Bond and experiencing everything from his perspective, which is all very well and good, but that ain't how you experience Bond films. And it's another fun level as Bond heads deep into the subterranean facility. There's the option of proceeding stealthily or just barging in and shooting everything up, and I, of course, prefer the latter of those options. The problem I have with the stealth segments in this game is that you can spend ages tiptoeing around and taking out guards with a quick Sean Connery chop, but once your cover is blown, it's blown. So why would I take 10 minutes to slowly maneuver around when a couple of well-placed shots can get the job done much quicker? Anyway, narratively, in a change from the film, this is where Bond encounters Natalia, the only survivor of Orumov's ransack on the place. The first meeting is brief, but after shooting around and completing some tasks, you eventually meet her again, where she ever so kindly offers to lead the way out of the crumbling facility. Despite Isabella Scorupco being one of my very favourite Bond girl actresses, I actually really like the Natalia of the game and consider her to be the best recast from the film. Bearing the likeness and voice of Kirsty Mitchell, she's a gorgeous character model, and I really like her voice, and some of the acting touches to her face during scenes with Bond are really nice details and well observed. She's a well-realised character in this context, and much better than what we get with Orumov, Onatop, or even Trevelyan later on.
Who are you? What do you do here?
Natalia Semenova. I'm a computer engineer for the GoldenEye satellite.
Drop it! You're under arrest!
Thank you. I could have done this myself.
Bond and Natalia are captured, and then we're back on familiar ground again, with the pair being interrogated by Defense Minister Mishkin, and Natalia even retains one of her very best lines from the film.
Why did you set off the GoldenEye?
Stop it! Both of you! You are like boys with toys. It was Orumov.
And just like in the film, Orumov barges in, kills Mishkin, captures Natalia, and then it's up to Bond to shoot around the archives and rescue the lass. No stealth tactics required for this particular level, it's a straight-up shoot-'em-up, but I really like the level design, and it feels like a nice update of the same environment from the movie and the previous game. Some nice little details too, like these busts of what I assume are Lenin and Stalin, which you can shoot up if you're a capitalist stooge like myself. Towards the end of the level, there's a fun bit where you're having to shoot dozens of guards as you wait for quite possibly the slowest moving elevator in gaming history. Really missing that Q branch belt from the film to just burst out of here and straight into a tank. Speaking of tanks, in a surprising move, the tank does in fact make a reappearance in this game.
On to Mi6. I need you to track a Humvee through the streets of St. Petersburg. It's the one being chased by a tank.
Now, this next bit really does feel like it's in there just because people have fond memories of driving the tank from the N64 version, but it's a very different level experience to what is in that game. And I mean, I guess I'm just kind of surprised that after no vehicle-based levels at all, so far, the game suddenly decides that this was a feature of the original game that just had to be retained. But more than that, I just find it frustrating that this is the only level of its kind in the game. I mean, they went to the effort of making it, could they have not reused the mechanics in another way? It is a fun experience all the same, just slightly annoying in practice. There are some pretty epic moments throughout the level, including a whole skyscraper partly collapsing. On a whole though, I never really feel like I'm driving a tank through the streets of a city, which was part of the appeal of the sequence in the original game, and indeed in the film. I guess this version didn't want you to have the opportunity to potentially mow down innocent bystanders like the original game, so they decided to set the majority of it on some kind of uninhabited building site instead. I mean, none of these structures look terribly livable, and the whole area looks run down, so I guess this was how they could justify causing all the damage to it. I mean, no one lives here, so it's fine. I kind of hate myself for not digging this level more, especially after all my complaining about, like, how I really wanted a driving segment, and I get it, and then it ain't that great, but I just feel like, especially even when you compare it with the N64 GoldenEye, it just ain't as fun as that, and it certainly is not as fun as some of the incredibly polished and well thought out driving levels in, like, Agent Under Fire and Everything or Nothing, for example. Maybe I would have liked this more in Reloaded if it had been balanced out with a couple of speedy DB5 chases somewhere. Hell, even a non-gadget, non-action level, just like racing a red Ferrari down a hill outside of Barcelona would have pleased me, for goodness sake. I hate to say it, but the next level is also something of a disappointment to me. My favourite level in the original game was always the train level, where you're trapped in this confined space and there are loads of guards and there's very little exploration involved and hardly anywhere to hide, but it's a claustrophobic, first-person experience. This level teases that possibility, but once Bond derails the train with his tank, that's largely all we see of the train until a very small section at the end of the mission when you re-enter it. The rest of the level is entirely comprised of shooting up goons at a construction site, and don't get me wrong, there are fun things to do and see here if you aim and fire at the right triggers, but it's been a few levels of this now, and a more confined setting would have provided some more variety. In another disappointing sidestep from the original game and film where Bond has time for just one shot and must choose between shooting Orumov and saving Natalia, or shooting Xenia and or Trevelyan. Here, Xenia shoots Orumov, and you have to take down the rest of the nameless, faceless guards in the room in a slow-motion sequence. Which just isn't as fun as having to make that choice yourself. Plus, I don't exactly get what triggers Bond's slow-motion vision here, given that every use of it so far in the game has required Bond to be bursting through a door or entrance of some kind. I mean, if it can just kick him whenever he chooses, then well, it would have been convenient a moment earlier when Xenia actually was in the room and you could have maybe shot her. I also don't like how, in lieu of a laser watch, you have to shoot through the panel in the floor to escape. There's no real time-sensitive element to the situation. It's a disappointing downgrade from one of the very best bits of the original game, but, this is a Daniel Craig Bond adventure pre-Skyfall, so therefore we have no Q and no good gadgets at all. Anyway, in another narrative difference from the original film, it's only after the train sequence that Bond heads to the Memorial Park to be confronted with the true villain behind everything. It's another level that blends stealth tactics with general shooting, and there's a nice eerie atmosphere with the rain and the lighting and the creepy cool monuments, but it can't help but pale in comparison with the graveyard level from Everything or Nothing for me. That level was so great and fun and spooky, and I mean, maybe it's an unfair comparison, but my mind always goes there whenever I'm playing this level in GoldenEye Reloaded, and just how it isn't as good. Anyway, of course, it's at the end of this particular mission where it's revealed that the true villain behind everything is Alec Trevelyan, who did not die earlier on, but rather faked his death. No surprises there, then. I mean, heck, even Bond doesn't sound terribly surprised to see his old comrade.
Hello, James. Alec. You're alive.
So given that we are 15 years after the cinematic GoldenEye, I'm pretty sure that Alec's motivations are not going to come from the fact that his parents were Lien's Cossacks and betrayed by the British government. So where does this version of the character's villainous motivations come from?
Why? Why? Look at the last 10 years. The wars, the financial meltdown. Who profited? Who came out on top? You thought you were protecting Queen and country, but it's all about the bankers and their bonuses.
Bankers and their bonuses. Bankers and their bonuses. You're so pissed off with the bankers and their bonuses. Doesn't quite strike the same chord as betrayed, murdered parents now, does it? The financial crash of 2008 was still big news at this point, and I know that Bond films often take their villain's plot from looking at what is a concern for the world in the here and now, but just getting pissed off at bankers and Tony Blair isn't really enough to drive someone to such lengths, is it? Well, apparently so, and Bond soon finds himself locked into the stolen helicopter and in a rather fun moment has to escape before the thing explodes.
Bond to Mi6.
What happened, Bond? Are you all right? What do you need?
I need a plane. I'm going to Africa.
Natalia has been kidnapped again, and so Bond follows the trail to Nigeria, where the final mission and the last 3 levels of the game take place. The start of this would be a perfect place for an airborne level, a la Everything or Nothing, but no, Bond's plane is shot down, and therefore he must proceed on foot. What follows is one of the longest levels of the game, but also one of the most intense, I find. This is one level where being stealthy is actually my preferred option. There are several miniguns dotted around that can be hacked into with the smartphone to kill groups of goons, but sometimes getting to these can be tricky, and you don't want to sound the alarm, because if you're caught short, the guns can turn on you and that blood will start trickling down the screen mighty quickly. It's also just kind of cool to be in a natural setting after a whole game of strolling down corridors and buildings.
We meet again, Mr. Bond. This time, I won't fail.
The level ends with a cool boss fight between Bond and Xenia. Unfortunately, it looks as if this Xenia prefers to do her asphyxiating with hands rather than thighs, but her demise is actually much cooler than what we see in the film, to my mind at least. I mean, she's dragged off a suspended platform by her harness and falls into the explosive wreckage of the helicopter that Bond shoots down with a missile. I mean, it's pretty epic, not too bad at all.
This time, it's on me.
Next up, Bond infiltrates Alec's solar facility, where you come across two rather interesting henchmen, I think.
So what are you going to do when this is over?
Me? Antigua. I'm going to take the money and buy a hotel.
Yeah, right. You'll be bored to death in 2 weeks.
Yeah? Well, what are you gonna do?
I hear they're hiring up in Kabul. Big money, lots of action. You'll be able to start 2 hotels, start a chain.
Maybe I'll think about it.
Yeah, you keep thinking. That's what you're good at.
I love the notion that every henchman is paid enough so that they could, like, move away and open up a hotel, and that some of those henchmen would think that it wasn't enough and would apply for further jobs after that, as if most of your current colleagues being shot to death isn't gonna be, you know, enough to make you take stock of what you're doing with your life and career prospects. Anyway, Hotel Henchman unfortunately doesn't live to die another day as Bond storms through the facility, killing all henchmen that he sees. There's some more mini-gun hacking action and stealth tactics, but this level really comes into its own for me when you get outside to the solar farm itself. I love this setting, and it's especially fun when you're snipering down goons. It's a tough level for sure, and culminates with Bond being captured, but so much fun. Getting captured leads into the final level of the game, which begins with a dialogue with Alec, in which he explains how he intends on getting off scot-free with this incredibly elaborate plot. And how does he intend on doing that, you might ask? Well, obviously, he's going to frame Natalia for the whole thing by using her fingerprints on the button to set off the GoldenEye satellite.
Hello, James. You're just in time to watch. You've given me the perfect fall guy. We're going to use her fingerprint on the GoldenEye control to detonate the weapon.
Somehow, I don't think that crime is entirely foolproof, Alec. I mean, after everything that has happened so far, do you really think that any investigating agency would take a single fingerprint on a button as conclusive evidence of, well, of anything? To say this game was written by one of the co-writers of the movie GoldenEye, Bruce Firestein, there are some really stupid character decisions, and yeah, I get that this is a game and therefore not as prestigious as a movie, but come on, is that really a reason to be so lazy? By the way, I'd also like to express my dismay here that this version of Alec does not have any kind of facial scar as a result of the explosion at the start of the narrative. I guess this is because at this point in the Daniel Craig era, everything was super serious and we didn't do cartoony villain features anymore, but it's a shame, as it gives Alex less of a personal cause to be pissed off that Bond set the charges off in the facility at the start.
Get her in the chair.
Interesting setup, Alec. You hack into the banks, transfer the money electronically, and erase your tracks with an EMP blast.
It's not just the banks, James. It's everything the bankers touched. The stock market, financial records, Every transaction on every computer in London, all gone in less than 4 minutes.
It's nothing but a high-tech bank robbery.
Anyway, on with some action as Bond's cleverly placed detonators prevent Alec from setting off the GoldenEye device and wiping out everyone's financial records. Wait a minute, wiping out everyone's financial records? Would that include my student loan by any chance? Maybe Alec's onto something here. Anyway, the game then proceeds to recreate one of the more trying features of its original N64 counterpart, as you protect Natalia while she does some computer wizardry to stop the GoldenEye satellite for good. Okay, so this section is nowhere near as annoying as it could have been, but there are some choice moments where Natalia's incessant whinging gives Stacy Sutton a run for her money.
Cover me, I need more time. Cover me, James. James, stop them from shooting me also. James, I'm hurt. James!
Some pretty trippy visuals here too, as solar energy floods into the room and starts blocking off parts of it. It's a cool segment, which ends when Bond has to physically go to the end of the tower and hit a manual override so that Natalia can complete her work. This part of the level is time sensitive, which gives it a extra nice bit of suspense, especially when things are interrupted by Alec himself and a brawl ensues. In a lesser game, this brawl would have been the final boss fight, but rather the battle goes on as you follow Alec into a separate chamber and it becomes a shoot-'em-up again. As a final boss level, I think this works really well. Combining the hand-to-hand combat with some shooting is great, and even on an easier difficulty setting, it can be tough to manage getting some significant shots in at Alec in between taking out the usual onslaught of goons. But as with the movie, the final showdown takes place outside, where Bond must fight Alec, avoid falling to his death, hit a switch to stop the GoldenEye, and get in one last shot of the game.
For England, James.
No. For me.
Daniel Craig just isn't a very good voice actor, is he? Then, just as in the film, Natalia comes to the rescue in a helicopter as players are treated to a final cut scene between Bond and Natalia in the jungle.
You alright?
Now? Yes.
Hold that thought. Bond here.
Well done, 007. We've received confirmation that the GoldenEye satellite was destroyed, and we've been in touch with the Prime Minister and the Russian Ambassador about both Orumov and Trevelyan. I'd like a full and detailed report on my desk by Monday next, complete with all operational specifics and a full list of recommendations. I've instructed Mr. Tanner to offer you his complete assistance.
I think you're breaking up. Thank you. I could have done that myself.
This is followed by credits, where we finally hear a version of the James Bond theme, and it ain't half bad. It makes me wish that the rest of the game's music actually felt like it was from a Bond film. But what else does the game have to offer, I hear you cry? Well, on the reloaded version there is Mi6 Ops, which are basically challenges where you earn stars based on your performance. So for example, there's eliminate all the targets as an objective, or defend a console, or be stealthy and don't get noticed, and so on. One of the fun things about this feature is that you can make the whole thing easier or harder for yourself depending on the modifiers that you can tweak. For example, like your health, or you can have infinite ammo, whether or not you have a golden gun, etc. And these modifiers dictate the difficulty rating of the challenge, which in turn dictates your final score. I like this idea in concept, but to be honest, I very rarely play these things. The straight-up elimination challenges are probably my favourite, but that's just because it's as close as we've come to having multiplayer bots since Nightfire. But the main extra feature is, of course, the multiplayer. Both online and local are available. But if you haven't ever played the game and thinking of picking it up for the multiplayer specifically, look forward to waiting around a lot, because no one really plays it online anymore. And you know, fair enough, it is a few years old and on an older generation console, of course, but this is exactly why I loathe the lack of bots on local multiplayer modes these days. Sometimes I just want to roam around a level and shoot some goons, whether they're computer controlled or not, I don't really care. But now if I want to play the multiplayer, I have to find 3 other willing people and extra controllers. But because some of you guys were kind enough to hop online and have a few games, I was able to experience it again, and I really, really, really liked this multiplayer. Easily my favourite online 007 multiplayer experience. The levels are largely well-sized and varied, with the occasional concealed spot or dark corner to ambush from. I really like the variety of weapons on offer, but my personal favourite and usual firearm of choice is the Moonraker laser, which has very nearly almost the right sound effect and is available in sexy black. There are plenty of modes on offer, but I think I may have only ended up playing about 3 of them, and regular conflict is really the only one you could ever depend on to have enough people interested in to get going. This is especially disappointing as one of the multiplayer modes was much hyped when the game was first released. Classic Conflict. The mode allowed players to select classic Bond villains rendered with astonishingly accurate likenesses in most cases, but it would have been amazing if they could have managed to get Pierce Brosnan's likeness for a multiplayer skin. Heck, get the likenesses of all the Bond actors for an exclusively Bond deathmatch. That would have been amazing. It's a shame that the villain skins weren't just included on the standard Conflict, where everyone just assumes skins of regular goons instead. One of the great assets of the Bond series is its array of colourful past characters, and none of the online multiplayer features we've seen yet have really embraced that, with the exception of 007 Legends, but we'll get to that soon enough. Overall though, the multiplayer here is super fun and well put together. I spent so many hours playing, and the only shame is that it's harder and, well, almost near impossible now to recreate some of those experiences as more and more people, quite naturally, just, lose interest in the game. And if those modes aren't enough for you, well, there's reason enough to replay the campaign mode with multiple difficulty settings, which include more level objectives, and a fun feature which involves scoping out these Janus insignias throughout levels. So that's GoldenEye Reloaded. Best Bond game since Nightfire? Well, quite possibly. This feels like a bigger step towards what I want from a James Bond video game. Solid shooting, fun multiplayer, and lots of replay value. It's remarkable that the game manages to have something of its own identity too, given the constant harkening back to the 1995 film and N64 game. GoldenEye Reloaded, despite what its marketing may want you to think, is very much its own experience, and isn't a faithful retelling nor a straight-up remake, which is good. However, by adhering as closely as it does to the story of its predecessors, it kind of lets itself down. The tweaks they do make to the story don't improve it in any way, and some elements of the gameplay just aren't as fun as the other game. Quite honestly, I'd rather they just have made a totally new Daniel Craig Bond adventure instead of all the harkening back and nostalgia-motivated choices they make. There are only so many times you can cash in on the GoldenEye name, and barring a potential virtual console release of the N64 version at some point in the future, I really hope that this is the last case where we see a Bond game with that in the title. Reloaded suffers from a lot of the same problems as the other Craig-era games for me. Lack of classic Bond elements, no over-the-top villains, no gadgets, no Bond theme, etc. But hey, at least the trickling blood down the screen when you die makes a reappearance. But it actually ends up feeling more Bondian than either Quantum or Bloodstone, I feel. Maybe it's just because it's tying into a pre-existing Bond story, but there are times when I play this game that I hark back to when I was 12 or 13 playing Agent Under Fire and Nightfire, which are still a couple of the highest points of Bond gaming for me. The biggest flaw of the single-player campaign is undoubtedly the lack of driving, or even on-rails, shooting segments. Each level does kind of more or less have its own unique thing, so I don't think it ever feels too repetitive, but some driving levels, besides just the tank, would have gone down a treat, especially when there are ample moments in the story for them. I've heard the excuse of, well, aside from the tank chase, there are no other vehicle chases in the movie, but they feel quite comfortable with changing other aspects of the film's construction to suit their needs, so what would a couple of extra driving levels been? But what we do have is an incredibly good, solid James Bond video game, and when this first came out, I was psyched. I'm a big fan of third-person shooter Bloodstone as well, so I was perfectly happy with the avenue Activision were taking the Bond series down, and then I was super jazzed in 2012 when it was announced that the next 007 video game would be paying homage to each of the previous Bonds, and another first-person shooter to boot. But were these hyped emotions fully realised? Well, we'll find out next time when we take a look at 007 Legends.